Hello, hello, and welcome to Running to Write. I am Ben Pick, and normally I give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. Tonight I'm doing just that. I took a break last week for a tag video, and now I'm back to my regular questionable writing advice through running metaphors, although there are no metaphors tonight. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, RC Scott. And thank you, Cool Gamer. It's awesome that you're all here tonight. And I can start off with a question because that was brought up. Favorite and least favorite dialogue tags. I don't need to be anything fancy. Said works. Plain and simple. Easy answer. Now, tonight, I'm taking another look at dialogue. I've talked in the past about this topic of talking before. Way back in the early writing to write days, I focused on dialogue as a medium for showing a character's emotions and general tips to do it well. Now, tonight, I'm focusing on 3 common types of cases and how to make them believable, because nothing takes me out of a story more than having an unnatural sounding voice. And I'll get into some very specific examples. But if I start thinking, who actually talks like that? I start remembering that all I'm doing is sitting here reading words on a page or watching a show or whatever I'm doing at the time or playing a video game and just thinking, wow, this is really badly written dialogue. So what I'm going to have is I'll be asking a bunch of rhetorical questions here. And those are things that we can ask ourselves as we are writing our characters talking. So let's go. Dialogue isn't easy, and a lot gets lost when audible words are put on the page. Yep, and that was a big problem I had with my own books, falling through, expanding cracks less so, but definitely falling through. That was a huge issue in early drafts of my manuscript. Because when I gave it to beta readers, one of the big issues that they mentioned was that it doesn't sound like real people. So I took conversations that I had with my friends and I did my best to place them into the story. And with those beta readers, they had a lot of complaints because they thought that the group of friends must hate each other and were despicably selfish. So just last week, my friends and I were planning a night for us to get together and play a video game, Age of Empires. Keep talking about that occasionally, but that's the game. One person didn't know whether or not they'd be joining us because they said they didn't know what was happening with their AC unit. To which my response was, well, it's used to cool the air. I implied my friend is an idiot and intentionally misinterpreted what he said. So we all routinely, within that group of friends, we all routinely call each other idiots to each other's faces. So there's that as well. Now, third person then commented, he saw the banter and he just replied, I hate you all. If all that were written down, we'd sound like terrible people. We still sound like terrible people, but there is nuance among that group of friends. If we were characters in a story, readers would assume that we weren't friends at all. And in fact, there was a bad loss that we had where one person rage quit, one person's internet tanked, so it was just me and another guy playing against 4 other people, and we lost horribly. But the guy quit because I made 3 different jerk maneuvers, and individually they wouldn't have been that bad, but the fact that I did all 3 of them in quick succession, 2 of them were the right decision, 1 of them was just me being a jerk out of spite. But the entire conversation, it's a good thing none of that was written down because there was a lot of things that would make it into my outtakes video. And to sort of bridge the gap, one of the guys, he, I guess, was on a plane. And so he was taking pictures on his phone of the Lord of the Rings with subtitles on it. And he was having an entire conversation with us using pictures he had taken from the movie. So anyone else wouldn't have really understood the references, wouldn't have really understood how it applies to us. Even if they've seen Lord of the Rings, what he sent would have just been utter nonsense. But because we have that context, what was hostility just became banter. And that's the first problem with dialogue. So I mentioned three things. The first one is banter versus hostility, particularly among friends. So where do we draw the line and how do we intersperse affection into our written conversation so it sounds natural? This is difficult to do. My first several attempts in following through, as I mentioned, were outright failures. My first suggestion is to detach reality from our stories. Where I had all those conversations with real phrases that I wanted to include in my story, I had to step away from that and recognize that readers aren't even if the people reading it are my friends, they aren't in that group of friends, so they wouldn't understand the history behind each term of endearment. So the way I talk with my friends and play our games is wildly inappropriate. There's F bombs and insults in almost every sentence, not to mention a lot of condescension thrown and received. To anyone overhearing us, like our wives, who usually only hear one part of the conversation, we sound awful. And reading a transcript of that would be even worse. So written words lack tone and cadence. Insulting my friends doesn't sound as hostile when I'm laughing while swearing, but that wouldn't come across on the page. There are still some lines, probably. I guess we don't cross into racism and usually leave each other's families out of things. So there is some form of respect. What does that mean for writers writing dialogue? If we're adding insults or phrases which sound hostile, be sure to build in adjectives that sound more friendly. And what I mean to say is ending a conversation with, I hate you, you're a terrible person, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow. It doesn't have that, it doesn't sound as bad because of how we ended it. So there's two insults and then something that kind of turns everything around. We need to incorporate those slight turns of phrase to undo the written word's hostility and show it as banter for what we're intending it to be. One solution is to go extreme. Have a character be so over the top that clearly nothing they say as an insult should be taken seriously. Next up is how to show or how to write for different age groups so they sound natural. In other words, I'm in my mid 30s. How do I keep characters from sounding like everyone is in their mid 30s? That's also something I struggle with when I was writing Falling Through. And the best recommendation I can have is to rely on your alpha and beta readers along with editors to put me in my place. Favorite swear word. I am live on YouTube. I'm not going to answer that question, Richard. But you can't get wrong with the good old F bombs because they apply to pretty much anything. In fact, there's a great movie, Boondock Saints, where a guy uses every iteration of the F word and it comes out pretty nicely. So, in my Into the Void series, most of the characters are high school seniors, and I have been repeatedly told and given alternatives for conversations and expressions that blatantly do not sound right for people of that age. One word I use less and less that my editor routinely flags is lest, Lest, as in I can't do X lest something bad happens. That gets flagged every time because no high schooler would regularly use it. I usually keep one or two in my manuscripts because the word gymnastics needed to fix those instances are too great for me to adjust when that one word solves so many problems. Oh, hey, Felicia, thanks for joining us. Yes, Richard is trying to lead me astray and doing a good job in the comments. Going back to dialogue gymnastics, these are some questions to ask while writing, depending on our age. This one is specific to me. As an adult writer, how do I write a modern adult without it sounding off? Or alternatively, as if you're a teenage writer, how do you write an adult who doesn't sound too friendly or uses too much modern slang? Another thing I've experienced is writers who are younger than I am writing people my age or older. and they speak in a way that sounds too comfortable, is probably the best way of saying it. Now, there are perfect examples, like since I mentioned Lord of the Rings, we have Bilbo and Gandalf. They've been friends for years and they're basically family at that point. They've gone on an adventure and come back from it. And so the way they speak to each other is exceptionally friendly until the conversation turns darker and Gandalf needs to treat Bilbo like essentially a child and reprimand him as such. Another great example is in Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is the pinnacle of modern storytelling. Yes, they have a perfect example for exactly what I'm trying to convey here, but I'm going to start with the failures. Backing up, Avatar is not the James Cameron movie of the same name, well, similar name, and that is Avatar, whereas the show is actually called Avatar: The Last Airbender, or the M. Night Shyamalan Abomination. This is about the animated series, which was it aired 20 years ago. And when I was writing the script for this episode and I looked that up, I was depressed and felt old. But time marching on aside, Avatar: The Last Airbender is engaging for all audiences. Even now, it holds up. And really quickly, it's spaced around 4 nations. You have water, earth, air, and fire. Each nation has some people within who can use that magic inherent to the nation. So waterbenders use magic that manipulates the water, earthbenders, fire, air, etc. Now, each of them can only use one type of magic, but one person among the planet can use all 4 elements, and they're known as the Avatar. Their purpose is to bring balance to the world. That person gets reincarnated, so there's always an Avatar out there to defend the people. But everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Now 2 young teenagers of the Water Tribe they find the young Avatar, and they need to go on a quest to save the world. Very summed up, doesn't do the series full justice. If you haven't watched it already, stop this episode, watch all 3 seasons of the original Avatar: The Last Airbender. You can skip the movie. Movie never happened. You can skip the sequel series, Legend of Korra, because it never hit the same highs as the original, but that's neither here nor there. My point is, for dialogues, I'm going to the extended series, which is the comics. And unfortunately, those also don't live up to the original. These add-on comics are like fleshing out Wolverine's backstory, where the more that we know, the worse the characters seem to be. Without getting into spoilers about Avatar, there are 2 teenage characters in the comics after the animated series is over. So this is basically fan fiction at that point. But they start dating. So there are 2 teenagers who are dating, except that they refer to each other as sweetie. Sometimes it's intentionally used to show annoyance and be in almost a patronizing way. But a lot of times it is also written to be genuine. And maybe it's my background, but I never hear anybody below their mid-20s refer to a significant other as sweetie. And to have 2, I guess, 16-year-olds calling each other sweetie, that took me out of the story and made me think of it as, honestly, like I said, fan fiction, but not good fan fiction to do justice to the characters. So it feels like they're going through plots and they want to expand out to hit certain notes and certain things that are hinted at in the show that the show didn't have time to explore. But it doesn't feel like it's the same caliber that the show is. And the one exception to me not hearing anybody refer to somebody as sweetie, except who's below the mid-20s. So me hearing teenagers refer to somebody as sweetie sounds off. The one exception is the South, but that's more of a common term for endearment rather than somebody who's romantically involved. All that to say, each time the 2 characters said sweetie, it felt like kids playing at being adults rather than 2 kids in a romantic relationship. In other words, all it took was one word to make an average story that expands the universe I am craving more stories to take place in to not live up to my expectations, rather than be a continuation of a groundbreaking series. Now, how did the original handle this? Look no further than Zuko. He is the initial big bad throughout the entire first season, and he lost his honor, and he's trying to reclaim it by force. Wow. There's a lot going on. No, so yeah, my wife is right. I didn't necessarily say don't skip Legend of Korra, but it definitely doesn't. Even my wife will admit that it doesn't live up to the Avatar series, and I feel like each and every season had a very core concept that would have been very interesting to explore, but it doesn't deliver. And I don't, whatever. I can spoil one thing. So the very first season of Legend Korra, it looks like it's building up to this huge energy bending thing, and there was a guy who seemed like he could take away people's powers using a very rare piece of magic that the Avatar had to go on a giant quest to discover in the first season, or sorry, in the original. And it turns out that no, he's just a regular magic user who is using a special ability in a different way. So it was going a really political route and really interesting. And then I feel like they just recognized that was they were going for a market towards kids, and they sort of pulled the rug out from under the characters. So yes, you can watch Legend of Korra. I just think that it is wasted potential. Now, back to the story. So Zuko is trying to reclaim his honor by force, and he has everything to prove in the first season. And he frequently speaks like how a kid thinks adults talk. He is forceful. He tries to put others down, and the language he uses would fit as a kid playing a role. Oh, hey, Barrett. Yes, thank you. We are going off on tangents, and I will happily discuss The Legend of Korra and Avatar for the rest of the night. But I'm going to go back to my topic at hand. So, skipping ahead to when Zuko becomes a more real character, his tone, his diction, his demeanor shift to be more natural for a teenager. He is uncertain. He is aware of his shortcomings, and he doesn't have to pretend to be something he's not. Now, unfortunately, I don't have good advice for writing better dialogue for someone outside of our own age group, because all the ways I can think of to get real examples are illegal and extremely creepy. But let me stress this again. Do not get real world examples by eavesdropping conversations of others, or worse. So no Freaky Fridays or trespassing. That's not what I'm saying here. The best advice I can give is to role play a conversation between the characters that we create. Put ourselves into the mindset of someone else, someone in a different age group as us. Try to remember what you were like as a kid. If you're a kid, try to remember try to envision yourself as an adult, or try to envision yourself as your parents. And most importantly, speak the dialogue out loud. If we stumble, if what we're saying doesn't roll off our tongues, then likely what we've written needs to change. And lastly comes family interactions. Much like with friends, there is history, and characters should sound different in these scenes. A young child might be excited to tell their parents all about their day. They're speaking fast without a filter and largely not making sense. They're learning how to tell stories, so those stories don't have to go anywhere. One of my friends, oh, whatever. One of my friends posts to our group of friends about things his kids say, and he will repeatedly share stories about his kids and kind of, I don't know, try and steer them right, but like at the same time, he will share how a conversation with them or a story that they're telling just goes nowhere, or ends up completely random and just devolves into a fart joke. So the way a young child will speak doesn't always have to make sense. And if you want to go that route in your books, then understand that readers who don't hang out with kids, who don't remember what it was like when they were kids, they may not understand those references. But if say your reader is a parent, they will, instantly understand exactly what you're trying to go for. And again, if we're writing a moment like that, that even seemingly that seems to be a rambling stream of consciousness, it can be about the day or a toy or the sky. It should still have some relevance in explaining the setting or the characters or the plot. So don't just have a child, go off in your story on some random tangent like what I tend to do. So instead, you can use it to explain about the world. So have them telling a story and maybe explain or show how there are three suns in the sky or how magic works or something along those lines. So you can use an element of how a real world child would act to explain something fantastical. Oh boy. And well, thank you, chat, for going very, very dark. Anyways, skipping ahead to a teenager where they could be petulant or quiet when speaking to their parents. They might give one word answers to legitimate questions or be overly snippy. Now, I'm not saying that you want to make them petulant because that is a very fast track to make me and a lot of other readers I know not like the characters. Because yes, it might be accurate for a teenage based character, a teenage inspired character to be overly rude to their parents or to teachers or to whomever in a story. Yet readers don't want to read those moments. I had a lot of instances where in an original manuscript, my characters just realize they have superpowers, so they leave school and go to a training montage. Some readers really didn't like that, and they really didn't like when my characters were rude to people asking them what they're doing. So there are a lot of triggering moments, and oh boy. Well, welcome, Barrett. Thank you for joining us, and I guess have fun with your ice cream truck. All right. So moving on from a teenager, skipping ahead 20 years, they might now be an adult who speaks to their mom and dad as contemporaries. Skipping ahead another 10 years, they might start speaking to their parents with the reverence they deserve. Skip ahead another 10 years, and the roles might be reversed. In some ways, they already kind of have, where the child might have to act like a parent. And, life is complicated. And it's very cyclical. My advice is to not go overboard with making a character too annoying. And you should definitely be aware of when a character is being annoying. Like I mentioned, when they're petulant, when they're being openly disrespectful. There's a very fast way to make a character unlikable or to have somebody who might be gray become a character that readers don't want to follow. Or you could reverse it, where there is a character who, in most cases, is terrible and then is really respectful to their parents or to a random child they see. So it could be a cold-blooded murderer who then helps a kid get a cat out of a tree or something along those lines. Hey, welcome, self-publishing with Andy. Thank you for joining us. Our goal with writing these different age groups that we aren't is to retain the person's voice while still speaking with reverence or with those individual cues with their family. So, like I said, your young child might be excited, or your teenager might be quiet, or your adult might be respectful when speaking to their family. Or the roles might be reversed, where a parent needs to warn a child of danger, and so they're overly forceful when really what they're trying to convey is worry and fear. So they're trying to kind of steer a child from danger by yelling at them, but that's not a healthy way to approach it. So also be aware of maybe some of your own traumas or not great life lessons. And I'll just leave it at that. So if you are aware of, if you maybe never came to terms with some of the issues, you were growing up with, you definitely want to try and address those before putting them into a story to recognize what is healthy versus what isn't healthy and to use those different methods accordingly. Hey, Adrian, thanks for joining us. Books by Adrian. Awesome to have you here. And yeah, the Writer's Den chat. I also haven't been able to join in. They're usually during my work hours, so I try to watch afterwards and then post whenever. Now, along with those, maybe make a character speak with overflowing honorifics to show a lack of respect. So it's a student could be talking to their teacher and be overly seemingly respectful on paper, but they're doing it in a way that it's obvious to the reader that they aren't actually being respectful. So while everything they say is technically saying, "Oh, thank you, Mister, this way, and thank you for doing this and the other thing, and I really appreciate it," blah blah blah. But because they are being extreme, because they're going over the top, it's obvious to the reader when those moments don't happen that the character is likely being something sarcastic. And I'm going to leave you with one last exercise to try while writing. Also, sorry, one last note. We want to work in subtext and ulterior motives to important conversations, because just because a character is monologuing or saying something important, or two characters are coming to realizations about how they feel about each other, doesn't mean that there shouldn't be subtext and internal struggles and everything that a scene requires. So we need to writing a dialogue is extremely difficult because it's basically, in a lot of cases, should be like a fight scene. You have different characters sort of coming in and out. You have an end goal in mind, but each character's end goal should be different. And where they ultimately end up shouldn't be where they thought they were starting at. Lots going on in dialogue, just extra things to think about. And if done correctly, we can remove dialogue tags and still know which character says a specific line, because only that character will be the one to say it. If you want, obviously say beforehand before doing this, but you can remove dialogue tags and try to see if you can recognize which characters say what. Again, you might even want to go one step further and do this in a copy of whatever manuscript you're working in, because that way it will be easier to undo all the damage. I've gotten beta readers and editors to comment how snarky lines can only be said by one of my characters, specifically Tracy, or how vulnerable Derek is in what he says. That's something that my alpha reader, Adriana, wife, I guess wife first, also alpha reader, can't mix those up. She mentions how vulnerable Derek seems in a lot of the things they says, or how he is not sure of himself. And so some of the things he can say wouldn't be said by the other male characters in the story. So John, who is extremely confident and largely narcissistic, he wouldn't say the same things that Derek would, although there is some overlap as the two characters clash. Some of the things they say could be said by either, but for the most part, under normal circumstances, when it's not a heated emotional moment, it's very clear who would be saying what. I strive for those moments when writing my characters and their conversations, lest they sound too stiff and obviously driving the plot. In other words, remove those as you know Bob moments where one character outlines the geography or political climate for another character's benefit, and by association, the reader. Whew. Well, I made it through everything. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write. Let me know in those comments how you write dialogue for characters who are not the same age as you. Do you try to avoid writing characters who are older, who are younger, who are of a different background than yourself? I post my running and writing thoughts on Instagram and X or Twitter or whatever. X is the new Twitter. It's not a porn site. I'm going to keep making that joke, but so be sure to follow me and join in with your own thoughts. Don't forget to sign up for the Running to Write monthly newsletter if you want regular updates on my sort of musings, pitfalls, and lessons learned. I just announced a September's newsletter last week. It comes out the first week, the third day of every month. So you got a while to go if you want to sign up for it. But you can see how my fall is going. And spoiler alert, something big is coming in 2 weeks. And because I don't really care about spoiler alerts, I'm going to be sending away my book 3 manuscript to the first round of professional editors. And I'll be talking about that and how things are going and how I prepare for it in my newsletter. So you have that to look forward to. See you next time. Until then, focus on writing believable conversations for characters who are not the same age as us. And yes, Adrian, let's see you all tomorrow at the Writer's Den. I believe it's 4:00 my time. So it's 4:00 Eastern. It's on Books by Adrian. And Yeah, I will see you all next week where I was going to start a series on the senses, the five senses, one episode each. There's a very good reason why I'm doing that. But I think I'm going to switch it up and talk about a topic I did recently where I talked about remakes, reboots, and reboot remakes, reboots, and whatever the third thing is. But essentially, it's the same thing. But I absolutely adored the live action One Piece series on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, go ahead. It is absolutely fantastic. It does full tribute to the OG series, the manga, the anime. It also is its own thing, which is what I'm going to expand on about what makes a remake successful. And yes, to my wife's question, is the reason because I told you they were good topics? Yes, you are right. That is part of the reason. The other reason I'm going to do a topic on the five senses is because we recently had a wonderful dinner where we went out and there was a perfect example of all five senses. There was whatever. We can go into it later. But that's what's coming up in the upcoming episodes. So you have that to look forward to. And yes, Richard, is the opposite of what Disney's doing. Now, Netflix doesn't have the best track record in this, but One Piece live action is hands down the best example. And actually, since I mentioned Avatar earlier, makes me kind of optimistic about how they might actually handle the series. I don't know. It's they're both on Netflix. How much control Netflix did, how much Netflix influenced the show, I don't know. But I do know that the creator of One Piece, Ichiro Oda, had very, very strict control over how his series was being translated into live action. So I think he got final cut, final say in a lot of the decisions. And because of that, the show retained its heart, which is fantastic. And again, even if you aren't a fan of the series, this is a perfect jumping on point. I'm going to say this next Monday as well. But if you haven't watched any of One Piece, you can just start right now. And thank you, Margaret, for joining in. Yes. I mean, I would happily let them piss away as much money as they want on season 2 of One Piece because the first season was stunningly wonderful. Now, I will see you all later and have a good week.